Hi everyone, I'm Daisy Rocha and this is what's happening in Brazil. We'll start by updating you on the latest news from the country. Voting for this year's municipal elections began last Sunday, where over 155 million Brazilians head to the polls to choose mayors and councillors. 11 capitals have decided the voting for mayor in the first round. On the other hand, 15 capitals will choose their mayor in the second round on October 27. Rio re-elected its current mayor, the center candidate Eduardo Paes, for the fourth time in a row. São Paulo will have a second round between current mayor, right-winger Ricardo Nunes and left-wing candidate Guilherme Boulos. President Lula welcomed 228 Brazilians brought back from Lebanon after Israel's attacks in late September. The first flight, including 10 children and 2 Uruguayans, arrived in São Paulo last Sunday. Another flight, on Tuesday, returned 227 people. It is expected that 500 Brazilians will be repatriated weekly. Around 20,000 Brazilians live in Lebanon, with 3,000 waiting to leave due to the conflict. With banners and placards calling for a ceasefire and denouncing Israeli atrocities, protesters walked down São Paulo Main Avenue, the Avenida Paulista. The demonstration marked 1 year since the start of the attacks, which began on October 7, 2023. During the week, the acts also happened in Rio de Janeiro, Porto Alegre, Belo Horizonte, and other cities, as well as denouncing the violence and showing solidarity with the victims. The demonstrators wanted to put pressure on the Brazilian authorities to cut off trade and diplomatic relations with Israel. Supreme Court has lifted the ban on social network X, formerly Twitter, in Brazil after the company paid fines and complied with court orders. Last month, X appointed a legal representative and suspended accounts under investigation. The platform was initially blocked in August for not complying with rules to block disinformation profiles. Elon Musk had also closed X's office in Brazil and laid off staff. Brasil de Fato visit riverside families in the city of Recife who were affected by the May 2022 floods. 2 years later, some people are still trying to rebuild their housings, fearing new tragedies and plans to adapt to climate change without a housing policy. Watch now in our story of the week.
Edna's routine changed radically after the flood of May 2022 in Recife. She lives on the banks of the Capibaribe River in Vila Reis and had her house totally flooded after the heavy rains that season.
It is a year I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It gave me an anxiety attack. I have anxiety attacks when it rains. It can't rain for more than 24 hours, otherwise I can't sleep.
To this day, the watermarks are still all over the walls of her house, which has been adapted to prevent further flooding. Edna is not the only one. In her neighborhood, there is another story of suffering. Hairdresser Agatha Santos saw her house taken over by the water from the Capibaribe River. After the flood, the civil defense interdicted the property, and with nowhere else to go, Agatha is struggling to rebuild her house.
That flood was a bit of a mess because we always experience floods, but it had never reached my house before. We've had floods throughout all these years, but they've never reached my home. In 2022, the water covered me in the living room of my house.
These families share the common fear of having to leave their homes because of climate change adaptation projects. They don't trust the city government's resettlement plans, which remove families from risky areas and adopt the policy of housing aid. The banks of Recife's rivers mirror the city's inequality.
O que a gente observa é que, de modo geral, a cidade dá muito.
What we see is that, in general, the city turns its back on the waterways. This is a process that has been changing over the last few decades, especially in the previous 20 years, with an initiative that emerged at a Federal University of Pernambuco, a Capibaribe Park project, which sought to revitalize the waterways.
In 2022, Recife City Hall took out a loan with the Inter-American Development Bank worth almost 2 billion reais to develop the Promorar program. The decision was made after the tragedies in the city. That year, 133 people died as a result of heavy rains, floods, and landslides. The plan involved the construction of flood parks in the city, infrastructure works, and a review of the management methodology. Promorar is expected to generate jobs for almost 40 communities in Recife. One of these actions is the micro-drainage service for the TGPO River, one of the most damaged in Recife.
Grande problema, o problema central das comunidades.
The biggest threat to Recife today comes from the sea. Why am I saying this? Because the central issue of riverside communities, those on the waterways, rivers or canals of the city, is not necessarily because it's raining more or because the river is mighty. It is because these communities have no urban infrastructure and they are getting denser and denser.
Meanwhile, Edna and Agatha live with the daily haunting memories of the floods and try to find perspective to rebuild their lives without fear of new floods.
I'm not going to live here to live in rented accommodation. I'm not going to leave the house that I worked for, that I fought to get, to end up living in rented accommodation. If the city council came to take me away, it wouldn't give me enough money to live on rent. Where am I going to live? But I'm afraid. I won't say I'm not scared of every rain and flood. I'm no longer the woman I used to be, enjoying staying in my own house with my things.
Across Brazil, protests for climate justice have brought together thousands of demonstrators against wildfires. The indigenous population is at the forefront of the protests. That's what you're gonna see now in today's Culture Talk.
Amid the fires ravaging Brazil, thousands of people are taking to the streets across the country to denounce the climate crisis and demand action from political authorities to mitigate the effects the population has been coping with. Indigenous have been prominent in the demonstrations. In São Paulo, the third demonstration occurred at the end of September in front of the Pátio do Colégio, a symbol of the birth of the country's largest city.
For democracy to happen, the people already here also need to have a voice because we do a lot without having anything. When you give us the minimum, we can transform the future that is heading for catastrophe. We can show people that we don't need to be afraid of an apocalypse, because we are guardians of the future.
The legacy of the Guarani indigenous people and the violence perpetrated by the Brazilian state is an integral part of São Paulo's history. In 2020, without proper assistance from the state, it fell to the Xandaros and Xandarias, the warriors of the Guarani Mbia people, to curb the flames that burned part of the Jaraguá indigenous land. Since then, the Guarani people have been working as forest brigadiers to protect 6 indigenous villages from fires.
Today, wildfires are an agribusiness trick. It is a trick by cattle ranchers, land grabbers, and those who want to take land. When the fire spreads from sugarcane plantations and burn birds and forests, these people are not worried about the cattle. They're happy because they will have more space to raise more cattle. Then they put people on the land to grab it. so they can buy it for lower prices, making these areas worth millions. That's what's happening.
Among the issues the Guarani people raised in the demonstrations were the murders of young Guarani Kaiwa leaders and the legal uncertainty caused by the discussion of the cutoff point in the Supreme Court and Congress. Chai Surui, another indigenous leader on the front line, points out that it was the force of the streets that led to the recent demarcation of the Sauré Muibu indigenous land of the Munduruku people in Pará State and the Supreme Court agreement to remove farmers from the Nhanderu Marangatu indigenous land in Antônio João, in Mato Grosso do Sul state.
A gente não pode deixar, que o massacre, que o genocídio.
We can't let massacre, genocide and death be naturalized. We can't let these fires and our polluted rivers be seen as normal. And we, as indigenous peoples who have always been fighting on the front line of the struggle for life, forests, and all kinds of lives and beings, we call on society to open its eyes.
Surui also stressed the importance of voting for candidates who are committed to the environment during this year's elections.
Para mudar tudo isso,
To change all this, we need to change the source of these attacks. They are also coming from these places of power where laws are proposed and where they decide our future. We are here to fight as we have always done. We are fighting for life and we are not going to allow the indigenous genocide to continue.
Do you like the show? So hit the like button and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to receive notifications. We will see you next week.